You can listen to The Professional Left wherever you get your podcasts, on Netroots Radio, or at our website, proleftpod.com, where you can also contribute to this podcast. There's a PayPal button at our website, or you can mail us a letter and or contribution at P.O. Box 9133, Springfield, Illinois, 62791.
This is the podcast for April 23rd, 2021. It's not safe for work.
Recorded live from the world headquarters of the Cornfield Resistance, where we almost canceled the podcast today due to horoscopes. It's The Professional Left with Driftglass and Blue Gal.
We didn't almost cancel the podcast.
I almost did. I was terrified. I was terrified. I
Hey, I want to say something here, though. I've always said this, that I don't care what anyone uses to get through the day.
No.
If they use pot, crystals, horoscopes, chanting to the stars, go for it.
Burglary,
No, not burglary or murder or hurting other people. No, but if it doesn't hurt anybody else and you're happy with it, go for it. I don't think the horoscopes in the newspaper are particularly well researched. But yours was hilarious. So why don't you read us your newspaper?
Look,
this isn't our local 4-page newsletter.
Let's get this straight. We have a local Republican newspaper.
Yeah,
and we live
Gatehouse, right?
And we live in Trump, State Journal Register, and it's the oldest paper in Illinois.
Yeah.
And it's down to 4 pages, and 2 of those are sports and obituaries. So, and one of those is just Associated Press rip and read stuff. So it's pretty sad. But it has a Republican slant, and I'm convinced they're sending me messages through the horoscopes, trying to throw me off as a liberal. So they could say, get out there and say what you have to say, and be bold and brave, and bring ne'er-do-wells to heel. But no. Today it said, steer clear of discussions about politics and controversial issues today. People are quick to argue because they want to argue. You have to be understanding with those who are closest to you. Now, the last sentence I have no problem with. The rest of it's all propagandistic bullshit from Big Horoscope trying to silence liberal bloggers like me.
They're trying to silence the liberal blogosphere.
They are, and they have failed. In fact, all they did was give me content. So bless their little hearts. I really appreciate it.
They gave you content.
They did. They did. Yeah. I sat up and said, what are we going to podcast? Oh, this is excellent. Oh, this is perfect.
You did. You told me that in bed this morning. You said, Look what happened. Look what's in the paper today.
Look what they try to do to us, Blue Guy. Look what they try to do to us.
The other thing that was in the paper today is that the State House leadership has voted for term limits for their leadership.
Yes, their own leadership.
Because Mike Madigan, who was the head of the Illinois State House for 38 years.
Yeah, forever.
And very corrupt and a millstone around the Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm.
Downstate, certainly. They don't want to do that again. They don't want to make that same mistake.
Yeah.
And so the Democratic Party in Illinois said, we're going to have term limits, not for actually getting elected. This is not about the relationship with the voter. The voter can choose who they want to represent them.
Right.
But we will choose within our House caucus a new person at least every 10 years to be the head of the
leadership.
House.
Yeah, the leadership. Which makes very good sense. And I kind of wish the Democratic Party in Washington would do that.
It's rotation in office, and it keeps things fresh. And that doesn't mean that I love Nancy Pelosi as much as anybody else. She's had a rough week. I had to explain to youngest child, who's righteously angry about everything that's going on. And
right on schedule.
I encourage that.
Right on time, yep.
Right on, it's fine. But, she was really mad at Nancy Pelosi. And I said, it's okay. You can be mad at Nancy Pelosi. She can take it.
Yeah.
And in this case, it was well-deserved. If people don't know, she said something to the effect that, George Floyd died for a cause. And that was very ham-handed. So,
well, and she's a junior in high school who knows who Nancy Pelosi is. And
yes,
I think
she does.
That's a win. That's a goddamn win right there.
Well, and we have a long time relationship with the politics and history teacher at her high school.
Yes, we do.
Because he's a Republican for the most part, and but was very close to Junior Dude.
Right.
And really helped Junior Dude blossom in high school because He was able to talk about elections, and Junior Dude was able to just turn from a very unfocused student to an extremely focused student because this one teacher who did not agree with David on a lot of things, but understood his passion, directed him toward, this kid knows everything about the Electoral College, everything about every state legislator, is going to get straight A's in my class.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to encourage this kid to go into this field of study, go to college, and take the world on.
Right.
And that was great.
Mm-hmm.
So now, youngest child has this same kid, who is Junior Dude's teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And that is already contentious.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be remembered. I don't want to be recognized because I have an older sibling. That's just no.
And the teacher just wants to know, you're the last one, right? I mean,
right.
But
I think the teacher also really likes debate and likes he knows that students are highly opinionated and have a black and white view of the world. I mean, not in terms of race, I'm talking about in terms of good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
Very stark, strong opinions about everything. And he encourages that. He encourages them to back that up with facts, which is how you teach. And so when youngest child comes home and says, I gave Mr. So-and-so a hard time today in class, I know she's not misbehaving.
Right. Nothing to do with, exactly.
She's saying, we talked about George Floyd for an hour, and I pushed back on everything my teacher said because I've read about it and know a lot about it and know about the trial, and I've been watching the trial. And he just loves that, even though he disagrees with her about some things. That having well-informed students.
Wait a minute, what you're saying is cancel culture hasn't penetrated the Springfield high school
system high school
yet, right? Yeah. Well, we got to work on that because who wants to have spirited, fact-based debate in schools? That's crazy talk.
Proud of our kids. That's the point.
And then you look, and not to go into any great detail, but you look at her report card and go, oh, she's just killing it. She's doing great. She's doing fine.
She's got one B on there.
Yeah.
The rest just says, she's doing fantastic. But anyway, not to brag.
Not to brag too much, yes.
But she's passionate. Mm-hmm. And we all should be this passionate, I think.
Yes.
That's a good thing. The verdict came down. There was celebration. And I liked a lot. I know I talked about Hal Sparks last week, but I liked a lot what he said to his listeners about take a little time to celebrate the win.
Right.
Not that we don't have another cop shooting this week right on top of that and more to do. But at least be grateful for when things go right.
Yeah, recognize.
It's okay to smile about things going right. That doesn't make you appear less intelligent.
No. Well, yeah, and that's the thing. People who mistake sort of grim, awful, dour demeanor at all times on all subjects as intelligence.
Which seems to be the issue on our side more than the other side, it seems to me.
I seem to recall an Ayn Rand quote from a million years ago about, how only stupid people smile frequently, because that's such a in my experience a bow tie wearing, glowering George Will conservative attitude that you have to lord it over people, and you can smirk at the stupid liberals, but really everything is a grim struggle against the awful common.
So you don't
left.
think that's unique to liberals?
No, I think it has become that way.
Mm-hmm.
The people who led the civil rights movement were happy warriors.
Yeah. A lot of them were.
Yeah, a lot of them were. And it you got to learn from people who've suffered more than you. There's a wonderful bit from the Mark Twain documentary when the woman that he's interviewing, the black woman who's living with them or whatever later in life, and he just looks at her like, I don't think you've ever known a lick of trouble and hard times. And she recounts how incredibly hard her life has been and how her children were taken from her and how she was working on a plantation when the black soldiers showed up and liberated the place. And she was serving dinner to one of the soldiers, and it was her son. And that's a story that Mark Twain just wrote down verbatim.
Mm-hmm,
and said, this is her story. But she was also a woman who carried herself with a light heart and was smiled and was kind to people. And it didn't destroy her.
Mm-hmm,
but he mistook that for being carefree. And those are not the same thing at all.
No, they're not.
And that's
Stacey Abrams was on Joy Reid yesterday on Thursday, and she said the same thing. Look,
good example, great example.
They're panicking. The opposition in Georgia is in a utter panic. And the way that we continue to win is to continue to win. When Georgian voters, when Black voters and young voters and liberal voters see that if you want the police to be held accountable, you have to have people in office, and you connect the dots. She said specifically, connect the dots. You have to have people in office who will hold police accountable.
Yes.
You have to have a district attorney who will charge a police officer. You have to have judges who will take a charge against a police officer seriously. And as people connect the dots, she said, what happens is they realize every election matters. And then they turn out again. And then we win again. And we build on that. And so she definitely felt that winning was part of the cycle of how you build on. You're building on success. And that doesn't mean you won't have setbacks, but you build on success. And so, I think celebrating and smiling every once in a while and cheering on when someone does well.
Lifting each other up.
It's a good thing. And that doesn't mean not holding Joe Biden accountable when he messes up.
No, it doesn't.
But it definitely means don't let this be an unhappy trip. It can be time. There can be times of celebration.
Well, and there's a difference between holding your own side accountable and becoming a brand, a contrarian brand. Obama was worse than Bush, and frankly, Biden's probably worse than Trump. That kind of really. Well, you can't.
But Driftglass Joe Scarborough said that Biden was the new Reagan.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on. We were held accountable this week, Driftglass.
We were.
One of our listeners sent us a contribution and said, I love your show. Here's a contribution, but you didn't mention John Boehner last week.
I didn't, and I feel very bad about that because John Boehner just lit up the week with his smile and his light political touch and his deft poetry of silence and sound. No, John Boehner, you and I have talked about the concept of cheap grace in the past. The idea that from
Dietrich Bonhoeffer,
whose book is sitting on our dining room table, by the way.
It is. One of a compilation of his writings is sitting on our dining room
cheap
table.
Grace is, as he says, the grace we bestow on ourselves. It's preaching forgiveness without requiring repentance or discipline or communion or confession or anything. You just
the shorthand I use for that is I'm not perfect, I'm just forgiven.
Right.
It's Jesus gives you a get out of being an asshole card all the time. And so it doesn't matter what you do. You're forgiven. You're washed in the blood of the Lamb. And being a white Christian is all you need for salvation.
And weeping John Boehner was out there this weekend last, flogging his $17.99 book, which he's begging people to buy so they can hear him call Donald Trump a poopy head and call his former colleagues crazy. But what he really wants and what he's angling for is the same cheap grace that most never-Trumpers have bestowed on themselves. I don't want to confess anything. I don't want to admit anything. I just want to move on with my life and and take credit for now that it's far too late. Calling Donald Trump an idiot and my former colleagues crazy. And by the way, none of this was my fault. None of this. You were the fucking Speaker of the House, but somehow none of this was your fault. You couldn't control any of it. You weren't responsible for any of it. And really, Barack Obama was somehow, pretty equally bad. And there's a lot of that going on. A lot of this we're going to revisit the Obama years. We talked about this last week, where we're going to go back and blame the Republican craziness on the Affordable Care Act. We're going to go back and blame the Republican craziness on the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. We're going to find a way to hang the blame for our depravity, our racism, our party's absolute insurgent madness on the black guy. We're just going to keep doing that and doing that in the hopes that everything in between has been so completely buried by the media and ignored by everyone else that we can just get away with it. We can just assert, I was a speaker, but I had no control over anything. It was never my fault. And John Boehner's been going from show to show to show, largely getting away with it. There's no pushback when he appears on CNN. There's no pushback when he appears on the Sunday morning shows and when he goes on Meet the Press. Comedians push back on him and bloggers do. But isn't that why the liberal blogosphere was invented?
Right.
Because assholes like this would get away with murder and assholes like the Sunday talk show guys would never push back, and they would never put anyone in the middle of that mix who would ask the obvious question, You were there when the building was burned down. You loaded up the bottles with gas, you stuffed the rags in, and you lit them. How can you say you weren't responsible for it? And then watch John Boehner, swallow his pipe and stalk off the set, which is all he would have to do. But no, he's a good old boy. He's a member of the club. So we're going to let him get away with bullshitting about the past, because that's the job of the media, and let him try to sell his goddamn book. And the thing is, it's not really working that well. He's doing the circuit, which is what you do. You write a book about how you were never wrong, and you tell stories on your colleagues, and then you sell it for a lot of money. And it's the John Bolton thing. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But everyone knows the act now. It's like the shittiest. It's like the 15th shittiest circus appearing in your town. We already know all the tricks. We already know all the bullshit. We already know what the bearded lady is like. So nobody wants to go there anymore because we know it's dumb and it's a trick. So this is an act performed strictly for the Beltway by the Beltway, because they're the ones who are the greatest sinners in all of this, and they're the ones who are most willing to grant absolution to anyone who will in turn grant absolution to them.
Well, let me ask you something, though. Does it have anything to do with the fact that Boehner is completely out of power? Because I think one of the reasons that Trump got away with so much was he filled the time slots on television perfectly and brought ratings, and therefore, and he's never going to be president. That is a key component to the whole Trump phenomenon. He's never going to win until he does. Mm-hmm. And so we're willing to use him for ratings, and we're willing to use John Boehner to fill in a morning show slot and.
Yeah, it's two drunks leaning on each other for support. They want to plug someone in who will say, it all started with Trump. They want someone to say, it all started with Trump, and there was some shit going on before that, but I wasn't responsible for it. So they want people who will say to the main, they want people who will not look into the camera and say, you people on ABC, CBS, and NBC let Republicans get away with murder for decades. This is, you have blood on your hands. Nobody sitting at that desk on any of those networks wants to hear from any person saying that they're to blame for anything. Mm-hmm. So they want someone to come on the show and say, don't worry, you're not to blame. I'm not to blame. Nobody's to blame. Only those people are to blame. Oh, and by the way, liberals are bad too. And that serves John Boehner's purpose, because he wants to go down in history as something other than Weepin' John, who let Donald Trump dick slap him all over the place until it drove him out of office. And they want someone on the air who will tell a funny story about why Donald Trump is stupid, blame the liberals a little bit, and not mention the fact that pointing a camera at Donald Trump and letting him get away with murder for years was part of the problem. So they all get something out of it.
Everybody gets that cheap grace.
Yeah.
Right.
The only people who are robbed of anything like decent political representation and decent news is the American public. And that's what happens when you have a corporate media who's interested in selling dick pills and timeshares and isn't interested in telling you the truth.
Tucker Carlson, Driftglass, you and I had a conversation about him last night.
And I'm not sure.
It was kind of interesting.
I don't know that I believe it, but I think it is intriguing and funny, and like that could actually be true.
My theory about Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
Well, my theory about Tucker Carlson, I love the bow that you put on it afterwards. My theory is, as I said last week, is that he has a bet with somebody of how Nazi can he go before he gets fired. Mm-hmm. And it's turning out he can go all the way as long as there's ratings. Mm-hmm. And so his ratings are now better than Hannity. He's gone full white replacement theory Nazi. Mm-hmm. He's losing his mind over the George Floyd trial, the murder trial of when George Floyd was murdered. And it's the Derek Chauvin trial.
Right.
But for Tucker Carlson, it's about, a threat to white supremacy. And so when anyone brings up on his show extreme force and so forth, he laughs maniacally now and is really appears to be losing it. And my theory is that, again, he got caught up in this loop, and you linked it to the producers. And I thought that was so perfect. It is springtime for Hitler. Mm-hmm. He is putting on a show where Hitler is great, where white replacement theory is a core theme of his show, knowing that it's not going to be a hit, that it's going to get him fired, and he'll be free. He can go off to his house on the Gulf in Florida and live his life, and off of his inheritance and his stock, whatever he's got from his Fox job, but he's done. Mm-hmm. And it turns out to be a hit. And now his wife's not speaking to him because he's a Nazi. It is springtime for Hitler. over at the Tucker Carlson show, and he's stuck there. He's in a contract. He can't change. He can't come on and say, I'm sorry, this was all a joke.
Right.
But if he goes to court, that's what that's what Fox News attorneys say, is no reasonable person would believe Tucker Carlson.
Right. And so, yeah, I'm not sure, because I mean, he was a racist in high school. He was a racist in college.
I agree that this is just sort of but it's an interesting theory. It's an interesting way to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, the idea in the docudrama Tucker, The Life and Times, you're going to have him having a wager with some equally asshole frat boy friend of his, also wearing a bow tie and also smoking a cigar, saying, you know what? I bet how far do you think I can go with this whole Nazi Hitler thing before I get fired? Because I don't want to work at that shithole anymore. Those people are crazy. I got a shit ton of money. I just want out of my contract.
I'm still in 4 years from my contract, and I just bought a house. And he did. He just bought a house on the Gulf Islands of Florida, $10 million house. So he sold his house in Washington, D.C. He does not want to be part of the Beltway anymore. I really don't. I think he wants to go live in Florida.
And now he has discovered that fascism is real popular with Fox viewers, more popular than Hannity.
And so he has to side with a convicted murderer.
Yeah, to keep it up.
Wow.
Stay on the treadmill.
Yeah.
Well, now that's all happening in a universe over here. Meanwhile, back at the respectable media,
the gray lady,
back to the New York Times. A gentleman named Nate Cohn made big news this week because he really, really wants to be David Brooks.
Oh, God.
And so, by big news, I mean Eric Boehlert did a whole column on him and did a whole audio version of him. And people were just rolling their eyes going, were you asleep for the last 15 years? This is a paid...
Because our message of Both Sides Don't has broken through to the mainstream. That's why.
And that is awesome. So I'm just going to read a little bit from his column from the New York Times. This is someone who is paid to have an opinion, and the gray lady, and here's the opinion: why political sectarianism is a growing threat to American democracy. And we're split into two camps who can't do a grand policy and politics, blah, 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 blah. Here we go. American democracy faces many challenges: new limits on voting rights, the corrosive effect of misinformation, the rise of domestic terrorism, foreign interference in elections, efforts to subvert the peaceful transition of power, and making
now stop there.
Yep.
Who is responsible for each and every one of those things?
Every single one of those things is something the Republican Party is doing as a matter of policy. That is what they believe in. And he is going down a whole laundry list of shit that Republicans are doing, and on purpose. And I would really like to have people like this one-on-one, where they don't get to ask the questions, but we get to ask questions of them. Like, okay, these are all the horrifying things that they're doing. They're coming for our democracy. They're relentless. They're cruel. The facts bounce off of them. They're fascist. They have blood of teeth and claw. What should we do? Should we oppose them? Because every time we oppose them, people like you freak the fuck out that both sides are doing it. But if we don't oppose them and they roll over us, then you're like, you freak the fuck out that the political system is broken. So what should we do? And his answer is that of errant New York Times cowardice. He's a fucking coward, because his answer is that the problem is the two political parties see each other as enemy. The contention helps make sense of what's been going on in American politics in recent years, including Donald J. Trump's successful presidential bid, President Biden's tortured effort to reconcile his inaugural call for unity with his partisan legislative agenda, and the plans by far-right House members to create a congressional group that blah, 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 blah. Most of all, it recenters the threat to American democracy on the dangers of a hostile and divided citizenry. Until the cattle cars roll up to the New York Times offices and start hauling people out, people like Nate Cohn will not take the right seriously. They just won't. Because if they start saying the right is the problem, they will lose their fucking jobs. So it has to be both sides. And the only saving grace here, and really, I in my column, I said, I suppose I should thank him for rounding up everything I believe is worst about American political reporting in one place.
Yeah.
Because it's deranged. You obviously know what the problem is and who's causing it, but there's something in your fucking contract. There's some big fat yellow streak running down your back.
There's a shock collar.
Yeah, or there's your shock collar.
Around your career.
That says you cannot blame both sides, even when it's clear. You cannot blame one side, even when it's clear that it's one side. And it's just, and the only redeeming feature to this whole fucking thing is that he got dragged halfway across the planet by everybody. And it's like, why are you doing this? And of course he won't respond because he's a fucking coward. People who say this shit don't talk to people who come with receipts because they're cowards, because they don't want to answer the question, because their job depends on hiding behind the lie of both sides do it. I really thought Trump would stomp this thing out. That finally it's like, here is the ultimate laboratory distilled proof that it ain't fucking both sides. And yet today, also on the Twitter, here's Bill Kristol. On the Bulwark podcast today, Charlie Sykes and I agree, somewhat to our surprise, that the prospects for a bipartisan political achievements may be more promising than most people think, and that a vital center may be emerging to fight illiberalism on both the left and the right.
So Bill Kristol had a meeting with some billionaire who's willing to fund another No Labels. That's what that statement tells me.
It also tells me that this is all they have left. This is what's so interesting about both the MAGA right, the Republican right, the 98% of the Republican Party that is racist and bugfuck and is irredeemable, and the Never Trumpers. Neither one of them can deal with the fact the left was right. On the right, on the John Kennedy right, on the Gosar right, on the Marjorie Taylor Greene right, liberals are communists, and they're an existential threat to America. But on the Never Trump right, they cannot flush the conditioning out of themselves that they've been giving themselves for 30 years, that the left can't be trusted. The left are stupid and they're crackpots and they're anti-war and they don't understand economics and they're just wrong. And it is impossible for these old men at this date to turn around and say, we're just goddamn wrong. And so the middle ground is, well, they're both wrong. The left and the right are both wrong. And that's as far as they can go. And that is incredibly destructive. But it also tells you that they can't make the turn. These are dinosaurs who are dying off, and their death knell is it's the liberals on both sides. It's the extremes on both sides, because they can't change. They have brainwashed themselves. And this is the only thing they have in common, is they both really, on a visceral level, hate the left and can never bring themselves, which is why they never talk to us. These people never invite an actual liberal on their podcast. They never, deal with them face to face. They always find some milquetoast, 1963 vintage liberal who's, on his last legs, just sort of agree that you remember back when Roosevelt, Johnson, and then they fall asleep. That's who they want to talk to. But you'll never hear these people invite an actual liberal into their midst who has receipts, who tells them they're wrong. And that tells me that
I wonder, too, if some of it isn't a philosophy that is, my stock portfolio reflects the military-industrial complex that made America great in the 1950s. And anything that helps individual Americans who are below a certain economic stratum is just a waste of money. Do you think there's any philosophy behind this that's Burkean or whatever, that the common man just doesn't deserve any of our attention?
Well, there is a noble lie philosophy that underlaid all of this stuff, a lot of this stuff, which is the American. This is straight conservatism. This is elite conservatism.
Right. I'm thinking about Dick Cheney is what I'm thinking. We will run the country, but the country is there to support industrial interests that will eventually benefit some workers, but trying to chase every poor person and make sure they're content and happy is just a fool's errand. Well, I'm playing devil's advocate here. I'm just trying to figure out if there is some sort of philosophical bearing behind this.
It's called aristocracy. I mean, this is the idea that, and this is Straussian. This goes way back to the 50s and 60s, where conservatives tell themselves, the elite conservatives tell themselves, look, we know that this country is screwed up, and we know that the masses need to believe a bunch of shit. So we're going to lie to them and tell them those things. This is a noble lie. But really what America needs is a ruling class, a small...
Well, that's why Trump was okay with them up to the point, if he was going to allow them to fill judges,
right,
and hopefully let Chris Christie choose the cabinet, then we'll be okay.
Then fine.
Because and they got half of that.
And that's why, right down the line, Never Trumpers react to criticism like dispossessed Russian aristocrats. How dare you tell me? You were snob, You were an asshole. You were run out of your own country by your own people, and now you're sitting on my couch telling me how to run things because you know I'm royalty. I get to tell people what to do, and that is burned on the board. That's on their motherboard, that they are the aristocrats of the American political and cultural system. And people below them should just shut up and let them run things. And if they have to lie to the masses, that's fine. If they have to, you know, let some people starve, well, that's okay. There are priorities in the aristocratic conservative hierarchy that must be maintained. And they had all, and they held on to power by building a racist mob to help them win elections.
Right.
And eventually the racist mob didn't listen to them anymore.
It is Russian. You're right. It's a Russian novel in that way.
And they ran them out of power. And now they want to sit on the sidelines and bitch about how everyone's wrong but us. And
in their fur coats and their
and they
drinking Dom Perignon in their fur coats, saying,
and they're dying
the
off.
world's gone to hell. Yes, right.
The only place they have that anyone takes them quote unquote seriously is MSNBC.
Right.
You know, these people would have disappeared under a bridge and been eating squirrels if not for the fact that people like Nicole Wallace found a home for them on MSNBC, invited a whole bunch of them to become basically the lineup. And so they got a second, third, fourth, fifth life when they deserved none. They don't deserve any attention at all. And the only reason they have the spotlight is because they say the thing that the network wants them to say, which is networks are not responsible for any of this. It all started with Trump, and the left is equally bad. And that sells, like I said, reverse mortgages and dick pills. And that's all they care about.
Senator Cornpone Kennedy decided he wanted a list from Stacey Abrams of the ways that the Georgia voter law was racist. And so she gave him one off the top of her head.
And then
she may have had some notes, but she certainly was ready for the question. And he had to stop her answer.
Yeah. That's enough. You're hurting me.
And today, doing his job, Senator Tom Cotton is lying about Stacey Abrams.
Yes, he is.
And it's a gotcha. She encouraged businesses to invest in Georgia after the boycott, whatever she's talking about. She didn't call for a boycott of Georgia. Some other people called for a boycott of Georgia, but she didn't. And on the day that they were talking about this bill passing, and she said Georgia isn't the right place for a boycott. It won't work. And we need to encourage businesses that are here in Georgia to resist this law and call up the people that they give money to and tell them not to do this. But Tom Cotton lying about Stacey Abrams in a gotcha move is so on brand for Tom Cotton and so on brand for the current Republican Party.
Well, and the reason this is this way, the reason Senator Cornpone Kennedy and Tom Cotton and the rest of them are sloppy and dumb and don't care about the facts, just lie about shit that you can look up on the internet as they're talking, is because their Republican base are one tick dumber than these politicians are. And so they know they can get away with murder.
Yeah, because it won't appear outside the bubble that it was a lie. No. Right, ever.
The only problem they have, and this is a serious problem, this is why liberals are not invited on conservative podcasts, is when they collide with actual people who have actual facts. When Kennedy decides he wants to question Stacey Abrams, and she just cuts him to ribbon. When Jen Psaki answers any question from anybody, when Katie Porter, all these women who show up to play, man, who show up with facts at their disposal and with a really calm demeanor and just eat these fuckers alive. That is, first of all, it's wonderful, entertaining political theater. But it also tells you they have all of the muscles that might have existed at one time for actually debating things based on facts have completely atrophied. They've rotted and fallen off the skeleton. There's nothing in their skulls anymore capable of mounting an actual argument or debating a subject. It's all talking points. It's all bumper stickers. It's all shit that they heard on Hannity or on Tucker Carlson. And so when they ask a question like, can you show me examples of racist, voting laws? Why, yes, I can. Boom, 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 boom. And then finally, stop. I don't want to hear anymore. It's well, yeah, of course you don't. Because you thought this would be an entertaining little gotcha question for the inbred, mouth-breathing, knuckle-dragging morons who put you in office. And I just put you in your place. And that's a black woman putting a white man in his place, a white conservative in his place, is just, gods are weeping over this. And so...
And she didn't Her blood pressure didn't go up one degree.
No, she's been through the wars already. She knows what she's doing. And that's the thing that this generation of political activists and elected representatives and leaders are bringing to the table on the Democratic Party. Competence and preparedness. And that is something that should win every argument. And the reason it doesn't is because there's this wall of stupid and racism that is just unbreachable by fact.
I also think she didn't go away after the gubernatorial election where she was cheated.
Right.
And so she is evidence by sitting there and being and existing and not disappearing. She is evidence of their crime. And that is something that they can't stand. In addition to her being a powerful Black woman who has the facts and has the receipts, she is living evidence that the current governor of Georgia, who's signing all of these laws in front of a picture of a plantation, he's the one that committed voter fraud.
Yes.
In order to win the seat that he's sitting in.
In order to steal the election from her.
From her.
Yeah.
And she is the monument to that, that they can't stand. Talk to me about Mark Halperin, Driftglass.
I'll be happy to. You know, Mark Halperin, as was documented on my weblog just a few months ago, and I coined the term because I'm just trademarking everything now. From chopper to chipper. He went from the riding on a helicopter with Donald Trump, wee on Donald Trump's lap, it was so exciting, to the wood chipper of professional doom. He was run out of his job.
Because of his own behavior.
Because of his own creepy sexual predatory behavior. That was completely unacceptable. It wasn't even marginal. It was just grotesque. And he was run out of town. But here's the thing. The purpose of the Beltway media, the reason it exists is to protect its own members. That's all they fucking care about. I've said this before. They will let insurrection and impeachments go after a couple of weeks. But when it comes to protecting Mark Halperin's career, they will try year after year after year to get him another gig because that is their priority. And so he fell out of favor. He was last seen as an audio animatronic pitchman on Newsmax interviewing the twice impeached traitor Donald Trump because of the thousands of viewers out there who watch that crap who think that's exciting. That was his job. He was an anchor on Newsmax, co-anchor on Newsmax.
Co-anchor, yeah.
And lots of people, Mika Brzezinski and Mike Smerconish and Joe Scarborough have been working real hard for years trying to get him back into the fold. And finally, they found the perfect group to hire him back into respectability. And that group is, wait for it, No Labels. You know, that centrist.
He gets to work for No Labels.
Yay!
Which still exists.
It does. I don't know why it does, but it sure does. And it's still out there. And money. And this is the same, both sides do it, centrist bullshit, problem solver caucus. There's a secret center out there. And we have a lot of people who are involved with it. This is the Joel Lieberman pet project. This is the David Brooks on the board. The president is Nancy Jacobson, I believe, who is married to Mark Penn. Just the worst people in the world. The people who cannot acknowledge that the Republican Party is the problem.
But they built it to get over W.
Right.
It wasn't to get over Trump.
No. But
W's in the news this week, too.
Yeah, he is. He is.
Selling his book of paintings and telling everyone that the Republican Party is crazy.
Those people are crazy. And bless her heart.
And he voted for Condi Rice.
Yeah.
He wrote in Condi Rice in 2020.
I secretly wrote her in. And because he couldn't spell Jill Stein, I guess. So, you know, it's that kind of useless hand-waving gesture like, I didn't vote for Trump. I voted for Condi because Condi's kind of cute. He's kind of sweet. Is that kind of like, he really is the simpleton we always thought he was.
Yeah.
And without Dick Cheney to tell him what to do and what to think, he's just a goof. He's just a dumbass. But he wants everyone to know that, you know, since Trump, and that's the key, Since Trump,
my party's crazy.
My party's cray, man. You know, the guy who used the phrase, smoking gun mushroom cloud thinks it's wrong to try to scare people into supporting policies. And, the guy who said, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists, thinks it's wrong to be divisive in his language.
Divisive and demonize your political opponents. Yes.
And I did write, I actually composed a sequel to my, the T-Belly Sneeches. I wrote
Everyone should just go read that at driftglass.blogspot.com. It's long, but it's funny. it will amuse you.
And this was 11 years ago. I wrote this thing about the T-belly sneeches, about this machine.
The bush belly. Was it bush belly?
Bush belly sneeches. And it was the fabulous T-bagulous Bush off machine. And Republicans would go in one end as Republicans would come out the other end as Tea Partiers who never heard of George Bush. And what triggered me, I've been thinking about doing this for months, but what triggered me was George Bush using the Bush off machine. I thought, that's just a level of complete tail swallowing, flipping the universe inside out nonsense that I need to now do this thing. But yeah, George Bush decided he needed the same kind of wiping out the memory, forgiving me for the past, not remembering my horribly catastrophic presidency. And so he made use of the same mechanisms, and he's out there, like Boehner, pushing his book.
Yeah. Hey, Drift Class, you mentioned wiping out memory.
Yeah.
We record this podcast every week.
We do.
And it's rare that a story appears and disappears within the space between podcasts.
Yes.
But Marjorie Taylor Greene's White Power Caucus that she wanted to set up didn't really blossom until after we'd recorded our podcast. And then by the end of the weekend, it was gone.
Yeah, it's like a political virtual particle. It pops into existence, then it vanishes.
And you're not supposed to talk about it anymore, even though there's documentation. She changed the subject very, very quickly by insisting on a non-existent debate with AOC, which she knew would work.
Sure.
She knew that mentioning Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would get the media's attention, and it did.
Ooh, girl fight. Ooh,
girl fight. Oh, hot. Yes, that is, and AOC should never debate that person.
No.
And she hasn't read the 14-page Green New Deal outline. And if she did read it, she wouldn't understand it. This is someone, though, who is Marjorie Taylor Greene is incredibly Trumpian.
Yes.
In that she doesn't know how government works and she doesn't care and is there for the grift.
Right.
But I did think it was interesting that she disavowed the document. Someone else wrote it, I haven't read it yet. The document that set up her America First caucus.
Yeah.
That, Matt Gaetz immediately signed on to, right?
And let's be clear. This was the Wake Up White People caucus.
Wake up white people. We want Anglo-Saxon buildings in Washington and so forth. And it is a white power caucus. And as you said to me earlier, they couldn't make a white power caucus because the Republican Party already was one, but she was saying the quiet part out loud.
Yeah. Well, and everyone else is saying the quiet part a little bit loud. She's saying it very loud.
Very loud.
So there's always that competition of who's screaming loudest. That person is going to be the new standard. But for now, it's a little embarrassing.
It's too embarrassing for the Republican House caucus. Think about that.
And that's what we do. They put out bullshit to see how it floats, and if it blows up, they walk it back. But it's like a shark attacking. First they nudge, then they bite, and that they're sniffing around for a way to get through all the way to pure white supremacy fascism as quickly as possible. And they're sort of trying different things. Will this work? Oh no, that burns. Oh that no. Oh, this works. This is great. And they just but they're always moving in the same direction. They're always ratcheting it further and further into a purely white supremacist fascist party.
We get all the power. Yeah. The thing that struck me, though, about the fact that there was a document is that I do believe that is the first written statement of Republican Party principles of any kind since 2012.
I believe you're right.
There was no Republican platform in 2016. They used the 2012 platform and only changed the Ukraine plank, which should have been a huge red flag.
Yep.
They changed the Ukraine plank and then said, well, we didn't change it. Somebody else, somewhere else changed it. And the lazy media didn't follow up on that.
No.
And so they did change the Ukraine plank from 2012 to 2016 to be more friendly to Vladimir Putin. And then in 2020, again, they didn't have a platform. The Democratic Party had a platform.
Yeah, no, the platform in 2020 was whatever Donald Trump wants.
Whatever Donald Trump wants is fine with us. And it's fascinating to me because the Democratic platform was put together by progressives.
Yes, it was.
And is being followed up on and is being Biden is being held to that document. Mm-hmm. And not that that's a problem, although, his defense budget is way too big.
Yeah.
And there are other things where they are going back to that and saying, your promises matter and here's where we're going to push back. I do really like how, particularly with the tax increases for billionaires, the Biden administration is clearly asking for much more than they actually think they're going to get.
Yeah, which is what you do.
which is what you do in negotiations.
Right.
Having documentation of what you believe in as a political party is kind of important.
It's useful.
Mm-hmm. And useful. But if you don't stand for anything, Driftglass, except own the libs, it's too much work.
Well, but you're talking. I agree.
But they have all those comms people on their staff. This is the thing. They really should be releasing comms all the time, statements of principle. Well, so to speak.
If you have, let's remember the history of the GOP up until now. Very, very quickly, it was dirty, rotten communists and their lefty helpers in this country. This is all Cold War, and when the Cold War ended, they needed another enemy. Because they cannot function except in a position of opposition. They have to be hating something. They have to find an existential threat and sneer at it and define themselves in opposition to it. And since there wasn't one, they simply invented one named Bill Clinton. They took a center-right governor of a small state who was running the country as well as anybody could, had a jobs program, gave them a shit ton of stuff that they wanted, was willing to work with them on pretty much everything, and they turned him into history's greatest villain. Because who are you as a Republican if you're not fighting history's greatest villain? And then they burned through Clinton, and then it became Muslims, and now it's just the left. And the left is history's greatest villain. Antifa is history's greatest villain. BLM is a direct existential threat to everything we hold dear, Blue Gal. And so if you've defined yourself not as anything policy-driven, anything related to real-world actions or activities or the welfare of your constituents, but the last bastion of freedom against the lefty hordes, then owning the libs is all you have to do. Because, and you do it on Twitter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it never does anything. It makes crazy Uncle Liberty happy in his pants to see Marjorie Taylor Greene owning the libs, and he'll send her $20. That's it.
And that's the end goal is get that $20. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to read what you wrote in our notes next, if you don't mind.
Please.
Because you wrote this so it's so clear. It's such a timeline. Over on Fox News, the waterlogged remains of Ben Dominic is trying out for a spot on the Fox News lineup. Dominic is a prime example of the wingnut welfare career ladder. First, he was a red state blogger. Then he was hired by the Washington Post, who fired him a week later when they figured out he was also a plagiarist. Then he found a niche doing scut work for the Heartland Institute back when it was getting its money from Big Tobacco. Then Andrew Breitbart cooked up a bullshit award program, the Sammys, which gave mopes like Ben both exposure and hard cash. Then he got a big boost from MSNBC, specifically Chris Hayes and Ezra Klein, who repeatedly had him on their programs because bros. Hayes called Dominic his favorite conservative. Then, with his respectability underwritten by the liberal media, he landed a semi-regular gig at CBS, made the rounds of some of the minor Sunday shows, and began showing up on Fox regularly enough to convince some wingnut dark money ghouls to bankroll the Federalists. Then he married into Republican political royalty with Meghan McCain. Yeah. And now he's trying out for a full-time hosting position on Fox News.
The Federalist is a horrible blight on the American landscape, and his actions on Fox are despicable.
Oh, and this week, look, no one really knows when someone gets murdered what the motives are. It's like, so really, can we convict anybody of murder? Aren't we all a little bit guilty?
There's no justice in the world. No
justice in the world at all.
No sentencing will ever bring justice to anyone, so why have laws at all?
Yeah, we can't bring George Floyd back, so why are we sentencing someone? Yeah, okay.
And this is a tale of someone who should have been canceled 15 years ago, who earned being
as a plagiarizing punk,
who absolutely earned getting his ass kicked the hell out of the media forever, and who was given chance after chance after chance, given free money, given awards, given approbation far above his station, who was then, because he's a bro, man, come on my show, Chris Hayes says, come on, Ezra Klein, and just over and over again was given more opportunities. And it's inexplicable, other than the fact that he's their same age and he's TV friendly. There is no reason for Ben Dominic to exist on the national stage at all. Other than the fact there is really a thing called wingnut welfare, and there's a career ladder, and he just climbed it and he fell off a couple of times, and his good friends at MSNBC propped him right up. And you can hear, well, there's a certain prominent liberal podcaster who still weeps over the fact that her good friend Tucker Carlson, whatever happened to him? Well, he's always been this way. You were just too stupid to see it. You desperately wanted to see in Tucker Carlson something that was never there, and he played you. Ben Dominic played you, Chris Hayes, and I don't know why, other than there's this deep, soft-headed belief that somewhere under this shit, there's a decent human being, and every time they get their pockets picked, and every time they get their teeth kicked in, and they don't seem to be able to learn anything from that. You cannot trust these people. They're uniformly bad. And every time you give them a second chance and a third chance and a fourth chance, you will pay for it. And now with him, it's too late. He's already, in ascendance. But which leads me to asking the question, which team up from this week is more cringe-inducing? Matthew Dowd on the Lincoln Project podcast.
Now, Driftglass, I would like to call him Matthew the Man Without a Party Dowd.
Matthew the Man Without a Party Dowd. He has no party in the middle. And this is Matthew Dowd of the Lincoln Project were former Republicans rubbing their hands together, wondering what happened, man. It was so bad. And of course, I can't be a Democrat because, that.
And that was actually the title of the podcast for
the
Matthew Dowd episode, The Man Without a Party.
And
Matthew Dowd.
I was not going to write a post about this until I didn't know it existed. And I looked up and the heavens opened up and handed this to me on a silver platter. And I thought, you know what? This is another mediocre example of former Republicans who've known each other for 20 years, giving each other hand jobs and crying over the party. And it was not the party I used to know. It's not the party I used to know. You know what would have elevated this to a firecracker of a podcast, a wildfire viral sensation, is putting someone between Matthew Dowd and Reed Galen, the host of the podcast, who's, let's say, a liberal, who has a memory and has receipts and can remind Reed Galen exactly why his party turned to shit and exactly who his Lincoln Project cohorts are, and remind Matthew Dowd of all the both sides do it, overthrow the establishment, disrupt everything shit he was running back in 2016 when anybody who told
the corrupt duopoly. Yes.
And how many people did he block who told him that was poison? Matthew Dowd will never acknowledge that Matthew Dowd of 2016 and 17 ever existed. And so it's another mediocre Republican on Republican podcast. But really, if you want to bump those ratings up, guys, put a liberal in the middle of it. You won't survive, but
African-American woman liberal in the middle of that.
Any liberal with a memory who can remember Matthew Dowd's past and the Lincoln Project lads' past in the middle of that. That would have elevated it to a completely different level. But of course, that's too dangerous, so they're not going to do it. So is that more cringy, or is Glenn Greenwald appearing on the Glenn Beck podcast more cringy?
I don't want to talk about Glenn Greenwald at all.
I don't either.
I've had the word Glenn Greenwald muted on Twitter, so I don't either.
Other than to say Glenn Greenwald appearing on the Glenn Beck podcast was the most inevitable thing ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's the
and now Matt Taibbi is calling Rachel Maddow the new Bill O'Reilly.
Yeah. Well,
to get attention.
The cover of his book, his latest book, I believe is called Hate Incorporated.
Because both sides
is a picture of Sean Hannity on one side and Rachel Maddow on the other. And I gotta wonder, when Matt Taibbi was dragging his dick around Russia for 4 years, fucking everything that moved and building himself as a reputation as a bad boy. Did anybody from Russia, film any of that and tuck it away for future use? Because Matt Taibbi did a heel turn of epic proportions. He has gone from Matt Taibbi, who beats up David Brooks and wants to know about the traffic meter situation in Chicago, to Matt Taibbi, who thinks the left is worse than the right and Rachel Maddow is a monster. And that doesn't happen without someone actually...
Somebody's got video of him with an underage person.
Allegedly. Let's just say theoretically. That would explain
Theoretically,
it.
allegedly.
We have no proof, but that certainly would explain it.
Something on him flipped. Yeah.
But I look back and look at all the people who, from Glenn Greenwald to Matthew Dowd to Matt Taibbi, who have just
let's throw David Brooks in
and David Brooks.
Because David Brooks' column, I did check it out, utterly predictable. Yeah. You've predicted this every year for 10, 12, 20 years, whatever.
I wrote a very fast post. I've been writing a lot of posts. I should just slow down.
Yeah, because your horoscope said so.
I know. I wrote a little post today called A Brief History of David Brooks. And I did one sentence or two sentences for every year going back to 1999. Wow. And it's all, the Republican Party is great, Democrats suck. George Bush is great, Democrats suck. Anti-war liberals are monsters and morons, and George Bush is a genius. Oops, the Republican Party had a problem, but they're going to get over it. And then blah, blah, blah. Oh, we need a third party because both parties are bad. No, Republicans are great. We're back being great. The Republican Party's cleaned up its act. They're doing just fine. And today it's, oh shit, the GOP is worse than anyone ever thought.
Oh my gosh, we're going to need a third party soon, Drift.
We're going to need a third party.
And then it's going to be Rubio.
Yeah. It's going to be Rubio. and it's going to be Rubio, don't worry. Then the next year was, Trump won, but it won't matter because the Republican establishment will keep it in line. And then the next year after that, it was, well, don't worry if he's being crazy because conservatism is doing great. And there's going to be a renaissance led by Jonah Goldberg. And then it was, I kid you not. And then it was,
no, we're not making this up.
And then it was, I've talked to people in the country and I want to talk about Jesus for a while. And then it was,
and humility.
Then it was, humility and Jesus, and that'll solve all of our problems. And then it was, what we really need? A third party. Really? You've only said that 15 times over the last 15 years. In between assurances that everything was fine. The
Republicans are doing fine. Yeah.
And it is that if you read back over history and read what he has written, David Brooks.
But the ironclad rule of David Brooks is no one is allowed to read David Brooks from last week.
He has no business having a job writing opinions for money at all. It's patently clear, especially at the nation's newspaper of record. But then I look over at Nate Cohen and Brett Stevens and go, well,
No, they're all aspirational David Brookses over there. That's the point. Mm-hmm. That's the point. I want to wish everyone a happy Sarah Cooper Day.
Yeah.
This is the anniversary of Sarah Cooper coming on the scene and helping us laugh through, inject bleach into the body, light into the body. She made the last year of Trump a lot easier to digest.
She did. She was the laughter in the darkness.
Yes, she was. Yes, she was. Let's do a news roundup.
Well, and you've already mentioned this is the anniversary of inject bleach and shove a UV light up your ass. So the opposite end of that spectrum, the U.S. has administered 200 million coronaviruses since Biden took office. Biden said that more than half of all U.S. adults had received at least one shot, and that more than 80% of Americans 65 and older have been partially or fully vaccinated.
And now there's quite the controversy about shipping vaccines and vaccine materials to India, which is being hit very, very hard. And that fight is going to continue. And we need to help India.
We used to do that. The Marshall Plan. We used to do things like that,
Yeah. So I want pressure on this administration to see this as a worldwide problem and
lead.
And lead, exactly. Yeah. Here's another situation. President Biden pledged to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 50% by 2030. And Greta Thunberg came out and said that goal is bullshit.
Yeah.
And this is a situation where it is perfectly okay to push Joe Biden from the left and make it more.
Yes.
Make it better. Go right ahead with the next one.
Well, because we have a party that can in fact be influenced by fact. Sometimes it's really hard sometimes. And sometimes there are people standing in the way, like a Joe Manchin or a Kristen Sinema, who are standing on some fucked up principle about, I don't want to change anything. I'm secretly a Republican. But people in the party can in fact be moved by fact.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I found it interesting that Stacey Abrams would not take the bait on hitting Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin last night.
You know why?
She would not take the bait on that because Kristen Sinema is a co-sponsor of H.R. 1.
Exactly.
And Joe Manchin is a former Secretary of State of West Virginia and knows about voting. And she is not going to burn bridges with any allies who might, in the end, be persuaded to support what she wants to do.
No, burning bridges is our job, not her job.
That's our job. Yeah. And we all have a role to play, don't we?
We do. And mine is loading up the bottles of gasoline and lighting the matches. Burn those bridges. President Biden will propose almost doubling the capital gains tax for people earning more than $1 million. This increases the rate they pay for that income from 20% to 39.6%. The proposal, and this is the important part because there's always what it's going for. The proposal would help pay for Biden's American Family Plan.
Yeah, and there's that pay for lie again. You know, we know from our Arliss Bunny.
That's not how it works.
And our friends that this is not how our friends in the Modern Monetary Theory Club say, you know, the Treasury can just print money.
And they can't.
The point is there is a principle behind taxing the rich and redistributing wealth that matters.
And it goes.
And so we want to do that. But the argument that Biden is making is a pay for argument.
And well, it is saying there's a thing over here that needs to be paid for. As Americans, we should pay for it, which is hundreds of billions of dollars for pre-kindergarten, expanding subsidies for childcare, national paid leave program, and free community college tuition. Those are things we should have paid for. Here's a group of people over here who are wildly undertaxed. Now, that is not how money actually moves through the system, but you can put those two together and say, there's an imbalance here that's just shameful, and things should not work this way.
Senate Republicans released an outline for their own $568 billion infrastructure plan. Democrats, however, rejected the counteroffer to Biden's $2 trillion. Notice the difference in money here. 1/4 of what Biden asked for is what is in the Republican plan. $2 trillion infrastructure spending package, calling the GOP proposal totally anemic and an insult. It is.
And we remember the liberal superpower. We remember the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, which was scaled way down from where it should have been and was 1/3 tax cuts to make Republicans happy because maybe
and then they all voted against it.
So fuck them. These people never argue in good faith, so screw them. Come back to the table with something that meets these 20 goals and we'll do it. But until you do that, shut up and go away. Your offer is an insult. I wouldn't wish you on my worst enemy.
I won't wipe my bottom with it.
Joe Biden farts in your general direction. On a vote of 94-1, with no surprise, Josh Hawley, as the only one voting in opposition, the Senate passed legislation denouncing discrimination against Asian communities in the United States. The bill also appointed an official in the Justice Department to review and expedite COVID-19 related hate crime reports.
The House voted along party lines to grant statehood to Washington, D.C. Yay! Yeah. The legislation would enfranchise more than 712,000 Americans, giving the 51st state one representative in the House and 2 senators. For the first time, the White House is on paper as being in favor of this. And the White House and the Capitol and the National Mall will remain a federal district. An identical bill passed the House in 2020, but died in the then Republican-controlled Senate.
Yeah. And Tom Cotton made an ass of himself, I think today or yesterday, going on and on about how Wyoming is a well-organized working-class state as opposed to Washington, D.C., which is, what he meant to say is, full of black people.
Yeah. Everyone that is trying to argue this is skirting around the issue that they simply don't want a Democratic stronghold to have 2 more senators.
With black people
and that they're black.
They don't want...
And they're black.
Yeah, they just can't stand that idea.
And this, again, I keep going back to Stacey Abrams, because she said this is such a panic. They will not admit that they have nothing for voters in this particular population.
Right.
They offer them nothing. And black voters, as she said last night, black voters are like every other voter. Yes. They look at the issues, they decide who's going to help them most, and they vote in favor of their own interests.
Yes,
And every time Republicans open their mouth, they are admitting they have nothing to offer this particular population.
According to a Housing and Urban Development Inspector General's report, the Trump administration delayed approximately $20 billion in hurricane relief for Puerto Rico and then obstructed the investigation into that delay.
That's criminal.
Yep, should be. People should be going to jail behind that.
Jail. The Trump administration awarded nearly $1.3 billion to a company to supply more than 100 million pre-filled COVID-19 vaccine syringes in 2020 and got 0.
Yeah, never been delivered. Yep. Well, maybe they were filling them with bleach. I don't know.
Oh, or light.
Light. Yes.
It's filled with light.
It's filled with light. The Justice Department will investigate whether Minneapolis Police Department engages in a pattern or practice of unconstitutional or unlawful policing, including the use of excessive force, discriminatory conduct, or the abuse of those with mental health illnesses or physical disabilities.
The feds are coming to Minneapolis.
Yeah, they are.
Republican lawmakers in 34 states have introduced 81 anti-protest bills, more than twice as many proposals as in any other year. Republican legislators in Oklahoma and Iowa have granted immunity to drivers who strike and injure protesters with their car in public streets. Mm-hmm. Indiana would bar anyone convicted of unlawful assembly from state employment. Unlawful assembly.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Including elected office. Minnesota would prohibit those convicted of unlawful protesting from receiving student loans and unemployment benefits. Kentucky would make it a crime to insult or taunt a police officer.
Yeah.
But that's what Instagram is for.
I'm saying. Just ban Twitter, man.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed sweeping legislation he's calling the strongest anti-looting, anti-rioting, pro-law enforcement piece of legislation in the country. It's also unconstitutional, Ron.
Depends on,
Depends on the Supreme Court, which seems to like to put children away for life. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's why they were focused for decades on packing the court with crackpots so that they could do shit like this. An Office of Professional Responsibility Investigation found that a Capitol Police officer radioed, quote, all outside units' attention on the morning of January 6th, and they should not be looking for any pro-Trump in the crowd.
They're just supposed to arrest the Antifa.
The Antifa.
People.
The pro-Trump people are fine. Just look for the Antifa. And that, again, people need to go to jail behind that.
Mm-hmm.
That is
criminal.
That is criminal. That is aiding and abetting treason.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. According to a report by the State Department's Inspector General's office, notice all these Inspector Generals all of a sudden finding crimes in the Trump administration. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo violated federal ethics rules regarding use of taxpayer-funded resources a lot.
Not Pompeo, too. He was the only one left who had a sterling reputation.
It's going to be Pompeo, Driftwag.
And finally, Donald Trump won 9 out of the 10 states in the 2020 election where most residents say they would probably or definitely not get the COVID-19 vaccine.
In local news, it is possible that we may have an end to at-will employment in Illinois.
That's true. They introduced the legislation.
There's newly introduced legislation designed to end the practice of being able to fire somebody for no reason.
Which is awesome.
Remarkable.
Which is awesome.
Remarkable.
And finally, in our county, there are vaccine surpluses because the people who wanted to get vaccinated, who were desperate to get vaccinated, and who lined up to get vaccinated are mostly gotten vaccinated. And the people who are left are the Trump people, are the anti-vaxxers, are the people who think it's all a hoax and who would rather, I guess, let everyone around them die of the plague than get a shot in the arm.
Thank you, Driftglass.
My pleasure, Blue Gal. Thank you.
Makes me very happy to podcast with you.
I really enjoy doing this still. And we're coming up on our 600th episode, and I'm still jazzed about doing it every week with you. Yeah,
we would love to have a letter from you. Please put letters show if you send us an email. Mm-hmm. Please put letters show in the subject line of the email. Also, you can send us a USPS letter. All of our information is at proleftpod.com. Each week, we post to our Facebook page and website an internet kitty sent in by you, the listeners, but Driftglass. This week, a listener sent us a picture of a litter of puppies.
Puppies!
This is a litter of 5 puppies, and from left to right, they are Gloria, Otis, Pipsqueak, Fat Albert, and Oscar. Gloria is the only girl, and she's the first one in the picture. And if you look at her face, you can tell she knows she's the only girl. Oh, my goodness. And these beautiful puppies eat freshly poured puppy food, our fake sponsor.
Oh, you know they do.
Whether you serve Pet Store Perfection or Dollar Store Direct, your puppies will sit on the kitchen floor and demand that the food they eat is only freshly poured. Freshly poured, freshly poured. Oh, my Lord, it's freshly poured. You can visit these beautiful puppies at our Facebook page and website. They are adorable. And you can send your internet kitty, dog, pet, fish, turtle, all of it. We accept everybody. At our email address, proleftpodcast@gmail.com, where you can also write to both of us. Feel free to write us. We love hearing from you. Be aware that if you write to us at any of our addresses, we reserve the right to read your email or U.S. Postal Service Go, postal unions. Let her on the air unless you say otherwise. Hashtag save the post office. And fire Louis DeJoy for crying out loud. Don't forget our gourmet coffee guideline. It's iced coffee season. If you can afford to buy an espresso-based beverage for yourself, buy one for us. This is not charity. This is our job, and it's a labor of love.
By the way, now that we're both fully cooked, or almost, I might be taking my wife out for coffee one of these days.
I know. As of next Wednesday, you're fully vaccinated.
I am.
You might have to go to the coffee shop.
I know, and lick every doorknob, because now we're indestructible. We can't be killed, Blue Gal.
Seats, lick the knobs, all of it. Yeah. Approximately 1% of our listeners support this podcast with a contribution. You can too. See our website, proleftpod.com, for details. Our PayPal, postal address information, merch, all of it is there at proleftpod.com. Please share our show on social media, and thank you so much for doing that. Hey, Driftglass, how are the Internet Kitties doing this week?
Well, Blue Gal, the Internet Kitties are 100% up to date on their vaccinations, and we hope you are too.
Let's think about living. Let's think about loving. Let's think about the hooping and the hopping and the bopping and the loving, lovey-dovey. Let's forget about the whine and the crying, the shooting and the dying, and the fellow with a switchblade knife. Let's think about living. Let's think about life.
The Professional F Podcast is recorded under a Creative Commons license. Copyright 2021 DGBG Productions.